today. This convening could not be more urgent. Today, 31 FBI field offices are working in close coordination with our law enforcement partners across the country to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute the recent threats targeting historically Black colleges and universities. I am in regular contact with our FBI team about these efforts. As with any ongoing investigation, I'm limited in what I can say about this specific matter, but allow me to be very clear. At the Justice Department, we believe the time to address illegal threats is when they are made, not after tragedy strikes. We also know that the threat against HBCUs and their students has deep historical roots. The Justice Department was founded during Reconstruction after the Civil War with the first principal task of combating those who used violence and threats of violence to prevent Black Americans from exercising their civil rights. In the over 150 years since the founding of the department, the threats posed by hate-fueled criminal acts have taken on many different forms, but our task remains the same: to use our resources and our legal authorities to prevent and confront bias-motivated violence and threats of violence. Shortly after the horrific attack in Atlanta 1 year ago today, I ordered an expedited review of the department's effort to combat hate crimes and hate incidents. As a result of that review, the department has taken steps to improve incident reporting, community outreach, and training and support of local law enforcement. The FBI has elevated criminal civil rights violations to its highest threat band. And we are using the expertise of our civil rights, national security, and criminal prosecutors to ensure a comprehensive approach to confronting unlawful acts of hate. As I recently said after the department obtained hate crime convictions in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, no one in this country should have to fear hate-fueled violence. No one should fear that they are being attacked or threatened because of what they look like, where they are from, whom they love, or how they worship. The Justice Department has no tolerance for unlawful acts of hate. We will be relentless in our efforts to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute hate-fueled violence and threats of violence. Thank you all very much.
Please welcome Deputy Secretary John Tien, Department of Homeland Security.
Good afternoon, everyone. Vice President Harris, thank you for bringing us all together to discuss our administration's common and unified action to defend threats against HBCUs and to defeat forces of hatred in our nation. Attorney General Garland, Secretary Cardona, colleagues from across the government and the HBC community, thank you for your partnership. As Secretary Mayorkas likes to say, our department, the Department of Homeland Security, is fundamentally a department of partnerships. This is at the core of what we do. Only through our combined efforts can we counter the threats of violence against campuses, houses of worship, critical infrastructure, and any racial or ethnic group. Exactly 1 year ago today, in my city, the city of Atlanta, violence struck the heart of who we are as a nation. As a proud Asian American, it also infected me, a resident of Atlanta, in a very personal and devastating way. Yet, that act of vile hatred spoke to a far more troubling trend that we track, evaluate, and work to defeat in the Department of Homeland Security every single day. The disturbing rise in targeted violence and terrorism perpetrated by individuals and groups motivated by a combination of violent extremist ideologies, personal grievances, racial and ethnic animus, and gender discrimination. The rise in targeted violence and terrorism affects individuals and communities across the nation. It is unacceptable anywhere it happens, and we and our partners are doing everything we can to defeat it. Domestic violent extremism represents one of the most significant terrorist threats to the homeland today. Hate crimes incidents continue to be prevalent in communities across the country. And it is within that context that we witnessed and reacted to the recent rash of threats against HBCUs. Let me state plainly, this behavior is unacceptable. Any use of racial slurs or denigrating stereotypes that stoke crimes of hate or any threats of violence will not be tolerated. It betrays the core values of equity, justice, and freedom that I personally defended for 24 years in the United States military. And at DHS, we stand alongside HBCUs and communities of color in countering any form of racism, discrimination, and harassment in word and in deed. That is why we are working alongside the Departments of Justice and Education to support HBCUs and other academic and faith-based organizations with information, intelligence, resources, and investments required to identify and mitigate potential threats. We will continue to share information about individuals and groups threatening violence. We will keep offering training on how to recognize and report threats, as well as how to best respond should an incident occur. We want to put resources and grants in the hands of universities to help enhance these organizations' physical security and strengthen risk mitigation capabilities, including on bomb prevention and active shooter preparedness. We want to build on the engagements that we have executed over the past several months. Our outreach to presidents of the HBCUs and their teams, our calls to state, local, tribal, territorial, faith-based, and other organizations to discuss the threats that we are seeing against Black institutions and houses of worship, and our recent, very recent, multi-agency HBCU symposium that we held on campus safety and resilience. At the Department of Homeland Security, our mission is to secure and defend and safeguard the American people, our homeland, and our values, and to do so with honor and integrity. There can be no clearer way to meet that charge than the work we reaffirm today to ensure no student, faculty member, professor, or visitor ever fears for their safety at an HBCU or in any of communities simply because of who they are, what they look like, or what they believe in. That represents the core promise of our ongoing commitment to HBCUs so that they do not become sites of fear and anxiety, but indeed sanctuaries of learning and exploration as they have been for generations. On behalf of Secretary Mayorkas and myself, we look forward to working with all of you to carry forward this cause. Thank you.
Please welcome Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona.
Thank you. Today, we gather to defend a basic right for all Americans, a right that underpins opportunity in this country and everywhere in the world, the right that allows me to be here today, the right to learn. The recent and ongoing bomb threats against HBCUs infringe upon that right. They've shaken students and fractured the sense of safety so critical to their academic success and well-being. And they evoke a painful history of violence against Black Americans that is uniquely traumatizing to HBCU students, faculty, and staff. The Department of Education takes these threats seriously. In January, after they were first reported, Secretary Mayorkas and I engaged with more than 40 HBCU presidents from across the nation. Their message was clear. These threats have disrupted learning, diverted critical resources, and strained campus mental health systems already overwhelmed by the pandemic. In my conversations with HBCU presidents, I've heard an urgent need for more resources, to install more security cameras, to improve emergency response plans, to train personnel on proper procedures for handling bomb threats, and to provide students with mental health services. Likewise, students are speaking out about the trauma they've experienced and the safety they deserve. We at the Department of Education are listening. We understand students' ability to remain in the classroom hinges on restoring and ensuring their sense of security. The department will continue to partner with HBCU leaders and contribute to the whole of government response to these threats. We support HBCUs so they can get back to what they do best, punching above their weight, educating the next generation of great leaders. And we will passionately continue to defend the right of every student to have a safe and welcoming place to learn. Thank you.
Please welcome President Thomas Hudson of Jackson State University.
Good afternoon. I am Thomas Hudson, and I am proud to serve as the 12th president of Jackson State University. Founded in 1877, JSU is an HBCU rich in heritage and tradition with a profound and impactful legacy spanning generations. At JSU and other HBCUs, we encourage intellectual discourse, nurture creativity, inspire innovation, and uphold the tenets of inclusion and diversity throughout our campus communities. Indeed, some of our nation's best and brightest thrive in the safe cultural spaces that are our HBCUs. But on February 1st, 2022, JSU and many HBCUs were met with threats of violence aimed to intimidate and terrorize our student body and stakeholder. It was not a coincidence that this malevolence occurred on the first day of Black History Month, a month reserved for celebrating Black excellence and achievement. It is disheartening that we have to acknowledge that racial bias and bigotry are still very much prevalent, but to let it go unchecked is a disservice to all who fought and died in the name of equity and equality. So it is with much gratitude that I acknowledge the efforts of our local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, who not only responded and guaranteed our safety, but also helped to apprehend those responsible. Their prompt response and collective efforts allowed our institutions to reopen and continue operations. However, if history has shown us anything, it is that it often repeats itself. So while the threat remains, we must remain vigilant. Being vigilant means building our capacity, and the Biden-Harris administration has allocated the resources to help us do just that. As stewards of these great institutions, we strive for preparedness and long-term sustainability that gravitates us towards away from a reactionary, allowing us to pivot easily in emergencies. The recent threats have exposed a deep-rooted issue amongst HBCUs. Decades of underfunding has significantly contributed to the deferred maintenance and vulnerabilities in infrastructure commonly found at our institutions. We want to ensure our students are given the equal footing to develop personally and intellectually without harassment. We want to elevate their quality of life and learning experiences, and we can do that with this additional support. Because if anything, the events of February 2022 remind us of why HBCUs were established in the first place: to combat the systemic racism that prevented Black people from being educated anywhere else. Today, we stand as essential economic drivers in our respective communities and producers of diverse talent and talent pipelines that advance our country forward. Any threat to an HBCU should be viewed as an assault on the very character of this country. In the face of adversity, let us be reminded that we must always stand in solidarity. And it is in that spirit of solidarity that I would now like to introduce Vice President Harris, whose leadership has brought us here today. Vice President Harris has stood with us and remains a committed advocate for HBCUs. We remain committed to working with her and the entire Biden-Harris administration as we seek to ensure that the HBCUs have the resources needed to combat this very real threat. Thank you so much, Vice President Harris.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. Please have a seat. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Thank you, President Hudson, for that introduction and for your strong and steady leadership as the president of Jackson State University, especially during this difficult time. We are joined today by extraordinary national leaders, members of Congress, members of our administration whom you've heard from, law enforcement officials, educators, students, and other community leaders. And we gather united against violence and against intimidation. 1 year ago today in Atlanta, 8 people were killed in a horrific act of violence. 6 out of the 8 were of Asian descent, 7 were women, and these shootings took place in businesses owned by Asian Americans. These acts were acts of terror that brought terror to the AA and NHPI community in Atlanta and to every community across our country when we witnessed the violence and the hate that was displayed that day. And they occurred in the midst of a dramatic increase in violence and discrimination against the AA and NHPI community. Over the past year, our administration has taken action to protect our AA and NHPI communities. Last May, President Biden signed into law the bipartisan COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. That law provides resources and training for state and local law enforcement to accurately identify and report hate crime, and addresses language and cultural barriers that often make it difficult for communities to report such crimes against them. Today, 1 year after the attack, we are reminded of the terrible cost of violence, xenophobia, and hate. Every American should be able to learn, work, worship, and gather without fear. It is our duty to do everything we can to protect all our communities. A harm against any one of our communities is a harm against all of us. So our work continues. And as has been described since the beginning of the year, more than 80 anonymous bomb threats have been made against dozens of our HBCUs, against historically Black churches, against synagogues, and other faith-based and academic institutions. These threats have been made in phone calls and instant messages and emails and online posts. These threats have brought fear and anxiety to places of peace, as has been mentioned, to sanctuaries, to schools where young people live and learn, to houses of worship where so many of us seek solace. They have caused classes to be canceled, dorms to be locked down, and communities of faith to be kept apart. Over the past few months, our administration has been in constant communication with the leadership of these institutions. And we have held numerous briefings, trainings, and stakeholder calls to gather and to share information. And as Attorney General Merrick Garland outlined, the Department of Justice has taken action to confront these attacks. Today, I will share 2 new steps our administration is taking to ensure that our communities are protected and that they are supported. Today, we are announcing that HBCUs that have received threats that significantly disrupt the learning environment are eligible for grant funding through our Department of Education and the leadership of Secretary Cardona. These short-term grants, known as Project Serve grants, can be used to hire more mental health professionals, to enhance campus security, and to provide specialized training to security staff. And again, they will only be given to schools that have received threats that significantly impact the learning environment. In addition, our administration is releasing a resource guide for colleges and universities with detailed information on detecting, preventing, and recovering from threats and acts of violence. And we will continue to work together with schools and houses of worship and all other impacted institutions to ensure safety and security. Today, our administration is sending a very clear message. This intimidation will not stand, and we will not be intimidated. We will do everything in our power to protect all our communities from violence and from hate. We are all in this together, and we must stand together. Thank you all, and take care. Thank you all.